Hello everyone, this is Sheila Shaffie and welcome back to another episode by ProcessArc. One of the great things about data is that it can take emotion and subjectivity out of a conversation, assuming that the data is accurate and reliable. And what research is beginning to show in relation to customer experience is that companies that have figured out how to effectively tap into the emotional journey that a customer goes through when interacting with you, whether it's servicing something or purchasing something new, can have significant impact to their bottom line. And we actually have done a video about this topic and I will link it above. But the bottom line is that if you improve client experience, if you figure out what it is that your customers want, and you simplify the effort that's needed to interface with you, and you enhance the emotional journey, you improve the loyalty, you improve the dollar spent per customer, and ultimately retention. In today's video, I want to focus on two particular topics: the concept of customer journey as it relates to the sales process, and what research is finding out to be some of the most critical elements when a customer is about to make a decision as to whether or not to do business with you. So stay tuned and we'll move on. If you were to task with improving the experience of doing business with your company, what are you going to do? What do you need to consider? The first thing that you have to understand and document for yourself is a customer journey map that's going to allow you to put yourself in the shoes of the customer so that you can figure out what emotionally it feels like, the amount of effort that it is required to do business with you. Now, I'm going to show you a graph that research is beginning to provide insight for all of us. And this is particularly focused on the sales journey. So let's switch gears and I'm going to show you the graphic, draw it out for you first, and then explain to you the elements that are of importance. Let's start with the major stages of a purchase journey. That they have a need, then they go through a search process, then they narrow their search, they evaluate their options, and ultimately they're going to make a selection, which is choose. Now, there's another axis to consider, and that has to do with how important these major milestones are in relation to their final decision. And so let's make this importance, and of course this is high and here is low. The other thing I'm going to do is what the research was beginning to show is that let's kind of cut this off and focus on the first four stages and then ultimately what happens when they make the final decision. So there is a couple of things a customer will be considering when they ultimately choose something. Of course, the first thing, let me just draw this line and it begins to dip, are the features and the functional benefits of whatever it is that your system, your software, your health, your insurance, your machines are offering. The next element that, the customer is going to consider as part of their selection criteria, as you may have guessed, is price. And I will explain to you why these shapes are taking place. And of course, price is quite important in their need and search phase, but then it kind of drops off. But when they get to ultimately making a decision, which is here, it again begins to become important. Ultimately, the last factor, the factor that is not going to show up on your RFP, it's not going to be on your spec sheet, it is not something that the customer is going to talk about, and it's kind of lurking at the bottom here until you hit the choose milestone or stage and it begins to shoot up, is trust and the risk level that the customer is willing to take in order to do business with you. Now that we've talked about the major stages, and the elements that the research is beginning to find are most important in customers doing business with you, let me switch out the media and explain what each of these mean and how to consider them as you are doing a customer journey evaluation of your business. So now we have the graphic that outlines the major stages in a purchase journey and the critical elements that a potential or a prospect is considering when they want to decide whether or not they're going to choose you as the ultimate provider of a service or a product. So it's no surprise that the features and the functional benefits are going to have a high importance along the first four major stages, which is essentially the need, the search, the narrow, and the evaluation stages, because that's when a prospect is trying to figure out how well your product's capability is meeting their needs and expectations. And then by the time they have already evaluated and narrowed things down, of course, that importance is going to drop off. Now, the thing to remember is that some of your features and functional benefits are going to be considered table stakes by your prospect. Some are elements that the more of which you have, the happier they're going to be. And then there are going to be features and functional benefits that will completely help you leapfrog the competition, that they will completely exceed their expectation. And figuring out which ones are what is really part of research and talking to your customer. Now, let's talk about price and why is it so important in the need and the search stage? Why does it drop off so sharply and then come back up again when it comes for them to make a selection? Well, it's really important in the first two stages because they're trying to figure out if you guys are even in the ballpark in terms of whether or not they can even consider you, if they've got the budget to be able to purchase or play with you, essentially. And if that's not the case, you're going to fall off. And whoever makes the cut in terms of budget, then that importance essentially drops off because they already know they've kind of made the cut. And then it becomes, again, really important by the time they decide to make the final selection. Now, here comes the element that no one really talks about. It's not going to be on the prospect's RFP. It's not going to be on your product or service spec sheet, and that is risk and trust. And it's kind of lurking beneath everything else, but it becomes of utmost importance when a customer is making the final decision, which is beginning to indicate one big factor in that customers really make a decision, a purchase decision with their heart, but they justify that decision with facts that you may have provided them through the pricing and the functional benefits and the features of your product and service. So what drives risk and trust is very intangible. It has to do with the amount of effort the customer had to put in to actually even play with you in the sandbox before they made that final decision. It has to do with you having engaged them at the right time, have had the right conversations. It has to do with your brand equity, the reputation that you have in the marketplace, what your peers have had to say about what it feels like to do business with you and their experience. So this is where the intangible becomes really important, and talking to your customers and understanding their needs and expectations and their journey as they've done business with you becomes incredibly important. Now, to summarize this entire video, customer experience is really about the subjective emotional response that the customer has when they do business with you. And that subjective emotional response really is driven by two factors: their emotions as they go through the journey and the amount of effort they have to put in when they do business with you. So the simpler we make that process, the more effortless it becomes and the more pleasant of an experience, because we are providing them with an environment, with the intangibles that makes them trust you and reduce that risk factor, the higher the success of capturing them as a new customer and retaining them long term. In the next video, I'm going to spend more time in how to actually build a customer journey map. So stay tuned, please subscribe. It helps us keep our motivation and helps us figure out what things you like and you don't like. I look forward to seeing you next week, and thank you again for joining me today.